So, Linda, we're turning the floor over to you. Thank you so much for being
Okay.
here today.
All right. Thank you for having me. I'm going to just share my first slide here and let me introduce myself. My name's Linda Rolleder. I have a PhD in ecology from Rutgers. I studied the impacts of forests, of deer browsing on forest understories as part of my PhD work. Um, so that that is a whole different topic. I spent the most recent 10 years doing invasive species removal with the Lower Hudson Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, which I led. It's a collective of over 50 organizations that do invasive species management in the Hudson Valley. And this is my new effort here. It's a Wildwoods Restoration Project, nonprofit that I started in 2022, and I'm going to tell you about that tonight. So, all right, there's my contact information at the bottom and also the website for our organization if you'd like to check it out. And I wanted to start by saying, most of us know this, right? Our woods look like this in the Northeast. Most of the Northeastern woods look like this. The only difference might be that you might have some invasive shrubs in the understory there, like filled with barberry or filled with bush honeysuckle or something like that. And this is not a healthy woods. Our woods really shouldn't look like this. But how did it get that way? It there are many factors that cause this result. Uh, a big one, and again, many of us know about this: deer eating everything in sight in the forest understory. So everything below about 5 or 6 feet down is because of overpopulation of deer and them browsing, but also invasive species and pests and diseases, things like the chestnut blight that wiped out all the chestnut trees, or Dutch elm disease, or now we're going through beech leaf disease and various other things that are causing whole species to be knocked out of our forest. And then something that a lot of people don't realize is past land use can cause this look of the forest. And that's when all the forests have been cut down. They were used for farming or pastures. And then everything grows up all at once. And usually it's red maples or sugar maples that just grow up and dominate and cast a lot of shade. So it's very hard for the understory species to get started. So it's a combination of all of these things, plus some other things like pollution, climate change, and other factors that are having an effect. So it's a big amount of different factors that are happening. But this is what our forests should look like. They should look like multiple layers. You should not be able to see more than about like 25 feet in front of you and through a forest. Every level is occupied, from the ground where there's mosses and leaf litter and organisms in the soil, to herbaceous vegetation, then shrubs, a shrub layer, and then younger trees, or what they call the subcanopy layer. So that's sort of the mid level here. And then you've got the canopy above. We still have the canopy, but we're missing all of these other layers. And that means we're also missing the habitat. So how do we get our woods back? Well, first of all, we have to control the deer in some way. And the typical ways are to either fence them out or to have a hunting program that keeps the population low. A lot of the areas where we live right now, it's so built up with residential areas or other buildings, you can't have a hunting program. So you're restricted to having fencing to keep the deer out in order to let the forest recover and come back. And I'll just say one thing about that is if we don't do that, as those canopy trees die, we're going to start losing the forest. So we sort of have to choose that at this point. We also need to remove the invasives. And there are a lot of park managers, not all of them, as everyone probably realizes, but there are a lot of park managers that are trying to do both of these things. And they are, they're trying to control deer, they're trying to remove invasives. Will that be sufficient? Once we do that, if we just sit back and watch, what's going to happen? A lot of times what happens is more invasive species grow. And it may be different ones than what was there before, or it may be the same ones because that's what's in the seed bank in the soil. So at that, what we've got ourselves into is a situation where we need to have active restoration in order to get the native habitats back. If you control deer, you remove invasives, and you sit back and watch, and it's all coming up with natives, hooray! That's all. That's the ideal situation. But in most cases, in our area, because we've been developed so long and our forests have been so, messed with over a period of time, we're not going to be able to be in that situation. We're going to have to actively restore them. But the cool thing is, that's why I created a Wildwoods Restoration Project, so that we could restore the health and diversity of our Hudson Valley forests. We use local native plants grown by volunteers like you guys and people to inspire a passion for continued stewardship of the forests. And so I'm going to tell you how we're doing that. But first, I want to say that we are working with park partners who are already striving to control their deer and to remove invasives. So we're rewarding them by coming in and providing the means to now actively restore those areas. Most of our parks, as everybody knows, are not very well funded, and they don't have the money to pay for this to be done. So what we do is, what we do is we support parks with their efforts. And this is us meeting with the state biologist at Farnstock State Park, doing a planting at Black Rock Forest, meeting with land managers at Granite Mountain over in Putnam County. So we work together with them to design plantings and choose restoration sites to work on. So the principles that we use are, sorry, I've got a pop-up here on my screen that I need to try to get rid of. Okay, here we go. The principles that we use are that we try to use local ecotype native seeds. And I'm going to explain what that is in a minute. And plants. We want to understand the natural community, what that natural community would be. And typically that's indicated by what species of trees are in the canopy, and some of the other remnant plants that might be found growing underneath. We can sort of figure out what natural community that area is supposed to be. And then we monitor results and adapt. So before we do a restoration, we go out and we do vegetation monitoring spots where we collect data of what's there, so that after we do our restoration, we can go back and we can measure the impact that we've had. Okay, so what does local ecotype mean? This is a new concept, relatively new concept. A lot of people, several years ago were just learning about why natives were important. And maybe you're in that category as well. You've just recently come to the understanding of why native plants are so important. We're moving a little bit further than that now and say, why are the locally adapted natives so important? Local ecotype is that it's adapted to the local environmental conditions. And the implication is that those individuals that are locally in the environment were best adapted to survive based on the nutrients that were in the soil, that come from the bedrock, the other community members, the other species that are there, and the organisms that are living with it, and the climate. So all of those conditions, the genetics that are present in that local population have survived in the local environment. So they're best adapted. And what I like to use sort of as my poster child for this is red maple. And this map on the right here is the range of red maple. Red maple is a native species. It's a native tree. And it can grow and does exist from Florida all the way up to Maine, and into Canada in some areas. But if you took a seed of a red maple tree that was in Florida and brought that seed up and tried to grow it in Maine, that plant may not do so well because the genetics that are present in that seed may not be adapted to the cold winters. They may be more adapted to the warmer climates. And the same vice versa. If you took a red maple from Maine and tried to grow it in Florida, it might not be able to take the hot, humid conditions down there. Same species, but different genetics because of where it locally evolved and adapted. Okay, so that's what we mean by local ecotype, trying to maintain that. So we look at local ecotype, but we also look at the hardiness zones. If you're a gardener, you probably have already been exposed to this concept of the hardiness zones of what can grow, what can survive the lowest cold temperatures. Sometimes people don't realize that this isn't like a whole climate statement. It's just what can survive the cold temperatures. So it's hardy to this zone. It can survive the cold temperatures that are present in this. This is the new updated map, and the bands are rising. But we do try to keep seeds within their hardiness zones, within their local ecoregion, and within their hardiness zones. Okay, so this is the ecoregion. This has to do with the ecotype. These ecoregions came from the EPA, based on EPA level 3. So there's level 1, which is basically a very broad designation, like we're in the eastern deciduous forest. That's a level 1 ecotype, or level 2. Actually, that might be the level 2. And it even goes further. So what I'm showing you here is level 3. It even goes further within these designations to a level 4, breaking down the ecoregions. We decided to live within the ecoregion level 3. That made the most sense to us. It gives us a grouping of species that, for example, if you see this aqua band here that comes through Orange County and down into New Jersey, this is the highlands. Okay, so the Hudson Highlands in New York and the New Jersey Highlands in New Jersey. And that we recognize as a community. It looks similar. You go in the Highlands in New Jersey, you go in the Highlands in New York, it looks similar. So that ecoregion made sense. If we were to go with the level 4, it breaks down a lot further, and it's a lot more record keeping to keep track of. So we're going with this. So if you, before I leave this map, if you look here at the Hudson Valley where I'm circling my mouse, and you guys can see my mouse, right? Just nod your head if you can. Okay. So this light pink is Western Orange County. The aqua is Eastern Orange County. The yellow is Rockland County. The dark pink is Westchester, a little bit of Putnam. And then this aqua up here is Dutchess. But then if you go over here, that's Western Dutchess County. These are very complicated ecoregion system in the Hudson Valley. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end when I talk about open questions, what that does or doesn't mean. Okay, so this is plant assemblages by community. We look and see what communities we think we have to pick the plants that best go in that community and within that ecoregion. Okay, so when we do our seed collection, it's modeled after the Bureau of Land Management Seeds of Success protocol. This is something that was paid for by the federal government for the Bureau of Land Management, doing a lot of seed collection and restoration of large tracts of land out west. And what that calls for is finding substantial, healthy local populations, obtaining a permit from the landowner, collecting no more than 20% of the available seeds so we don't compromise that existing population, and collecting from individuals throughout the population so that we can ensure genetic diversity. So you want to get from the edges, you want to get from the drier part of the population, the wetter part of the population. You want to get from the middle, you want to get taller plants, shorter plants, things that are flowering early, things that are flowering late, so that you can represent the maximum amount of genetic diversity in the seeds that you collect. And that's one of the things we want to do, is we want to preserve that genetic diversity. So we also keep the provenance. If you do any kind of art collecting, you'll know what provenance means. It's the place of origin and the whole history of ownership. Okay, so what does that mean with seeds? It means we record where we collected that seed, and as we grow it into plants and we grow those plants larger, we keep that information with the plants so that we know when we are installing a plant in a restoration project exactly where the seed for that plant came from. And we can put it back in the same ecoregion and the same ecological community that it came from. So we have records or documents that show that. So we also store our excess seeds in a seed bank. I'd never heard of a seed bank till about 5 years ago. Well, they exist. And there is one on Staten Island for the Mid-Atlantic states, and there's one being built at the Native Plant Trust in Massachusetts for the northeastern area. And so we have the option, because we're in New York and no one can quite decide if we're in New England or the Mid-Atlantic, we have the option of depositing our extra seeds in either one of those seed banks. And what there are climate controlled rooms that keep the seeds at the optimal temperature so that they remain viable as long as possible. But the problem with that is some seeds can't be stored. They're known as recalcitrant seeds. I love that word. I hadn't heard of that until like, they're recalcitrant. They just don't like to be stored, you know. So this, unfortunately, is many wetland plants, some spring ephemerals, for example, like bloodroots and trilliums, and the oaks, the hickories, the maples. There's quite a lot of species that you really can't store the seeds without them losing viability and going bad too quickly. But there's a whole bunch more that you can store the seeds of. And that gives us the opportunity to build up the seed supplies so that more species of ecotype, where the ecotype provenance is preserved, are available for people for restoration projects. One way we can build up the seeds is to have founder or foundation plots. So these are planted beds of ecotype plants to be in, you can tend them. So this is showing at Greenbelt Native Plant Center in Staten Island. they're doing it sort of like an agricultural setting. So they put down landscape fabric, they put holes in that landscape fabric, and they put the same kind of native plant in that whole bed. And then what they can do is they can water those if they need to. They can weed it, or they're using weed block to keep the weed down. But then in the fall, when the seeds are ready, they can harvest all the seeds from that area. And now they've turned 100 plants into hundreds of thousands of seeds that can then be replicated and given to other people to grow those plants. So this is one way of increasing the amount of native seeds that are available. And one reason I wanted to put this slide in here is we are looking for places to have founder plots for seeds in so we can increase the amount. Now, what is shown here is an agricultural style. You don't have to do it in this style with the landscape fabric and all in rows. You can do naturalistic plantings that blend more into your forest or your meadow to do this. Okay, so the other thing that you can do to help us out is you can scout for populations that we could collect seed from. Remember that we're looking for healthy, good-sized populations that are reproducing. That means they're flowering or they're going to produce seed. And you can take a photo of the plant and the population and submit it to iNaturalist. We have a project called Wildwoods Restoration Populations, and you can submit your observations to the project. So remember, I do say that we get permission from the landowners to collect seeds. So if it's in a park, we'll approach the park land managers, make sure that we have a permit before we collect that seed. Okay. So we do seed collection and sowing. We organize volunteers to grow the plants from the locally collected seed. So volunteers are involved in doing the seed collecting. We have a training session you have to go through if you're going to collect seed for us. And you have to do the paperwork that's required to record where the seed came from. And then we have volunteer work days where we get together and we sow the seeds. And that's usually in the fall. We also have volunteers help us pot up seedlings. The work days are held in late May through early July throughout the Lower Hudson Valley. What we do is you can see these plastic bins here with the soil in them. We pack everything up and we go to our partner location. So we're partnering with, for example, one of our partners is Black Rock Forest. And this is what those a couple of those photos are from. So we pack everything up, we go to Black Rock Forest, and all the local volunteers that volunteer at Black Rock Forest can come there and do potting up. We don't make people drive to our location. So that's a nice thing. It's all portable, and we hold those throughout the Lower Hudson Valley. We have volunteers take plants home to grow. So each of these volunteers is posing for a selfie with the plants that they grew for us. And several of these volunteers, this was the first time they'd grown any plants. So they didn't have any experience. You'll see this guy, he had experience. He had a lot of trays of plants that he was growing. But usually we start off our new volunteers with just one tray to take care of. And you see how big that tray is. It's not very big. So you don't have to have a lot of room. We actually have a couple of volunteers that live in apartments that are growing, they grow their plants on their balconies. So that's definitely possible. Then we have our volunteers help plant in restoration sites. So our work days for planting are usually in September and October. And you can see the size of the plants, these small pots here that we're dealing with. So it doesn't have to be a big hole that we're digging. And we have even kids can be involved in the planting because it doesn't take too much to dig those holes and to get the plants in. So the partners we currently have And remember, we just started in 2022, so we're still a young organization, and we would love to take on more partners, but until we have more resources and maybe an employee that can help organize everything, it's all volunteer right now. So we are currently partnering with Black Rock Forest, Hudson Highlands Land Trust, Pound Ridge Land Conservancy, the New York State Parks, and the Westchester County Parks. And our new partner for 2024 is the Land Conservancy of New Jersey. So we are having some partners in New Jersey. This will be our first one. So some of the things that we were able to accomplish, and I got some views on the bottom there of our growing facility in Salisbury Mills. We had 135 volunteers last year. We grew 12,000 plants, and we did 200 seed collections. Our volunteers spent about 1,700 hours working for us, and we got 4,000, a little over 4,000 of our plants planted in the ground last year. We could have planted more if we hadn't had so much rain in October last year. A couple of our planting days got rained out twice. And also some of those 12,000 plants that we grew, we kept to grow larger for next year, like some of the shrubs and things like that. We want them to grow a little larger before we plant them. But we did 10 restoration sites, and we've worked in all 4 ecoregions that are in the Hudson Valley. So we did do a volunteer survey at the end of 2022 with our first set of volunteers, just to see, if we had the right formula. And it does turn out that, yeah, people were inspired to continue doing this stewardship. When you're taking care of these plants and growing them, you sort of get attached to them, and you want to see them succeed. And I think that a lot of our volunteers really learned a lot by working with us, and they really felt like they had made a difference. They really got to participate from soup to nuts in the restoration project, getting those plants in the ground and seeing it all planted. So the other thing we do is plant rescues. So if we hear about a natural area that has good amount of natives in it that is going to be impacted by construction, parking lot, trail building, and we have the landowner's permission, we can go in and rescue native plants. And we did 3 plant rescues, and where we rescued over 3,000 native plants. So this is something that's not the main focus of what we do, but it is something that we also allows us to preserve the genetic diversity of the native species in a different way. So we do have some current open questions. So these are some of the interesting ones for those of you that are scientists in the group. How far can you move a seed and have it not matter? So we've collected seed in ecoregion 58 that goes through the Hudson Highlands. Can we move it across the river into Westchester, which is a different ecoregion? When you think about it, think about how seeds are dispersed. If a bird eats the berry and it flies a long distance before it poops it out, it's mixing those genetics anyway. So maybe it doesn't matter if it's a species that, bird eats the berry in the Hudson Highlands and flies, 20 miles and poops it. That species probably has the same genetics anyway. But if it's something that's dispersed by ants, for example, that seed probably doesn't move very far at all over a long period of time. So the genetics are probably very unique to that population, within the individual population, even within an ecoregion. So this is an area of study, of active study, of when does it matter and how can you avoid moving the genetic material so that it's not adapted to where you're moving it to. The next one is, how do you preserve genetic diversity? So here's some of the things that you don't necessarily think about. If you've collected seed, but you've only collected it one day from that population, you've missed the early bloomers, you've missed the late bloomers, or the seeds that ripened before you were there and the seeds that are going to ripen after you were there. So you almost need to make sure you go multiple times to a population to collect seed to get the maximum amount of diversity. Well, so what's the problem with that? Is if you only collect the late blooming seed, then those individuals may not be as well adapted if there aren't the variable genetics that allow some of them to bloom earlier and some of them to bloom later. That variability allows that population to survive the shifting climate, because some of them will be earlier, some will be later. And the climate change may knock out a certain portion of them, but if you've got variability, you'll always have some that are going to survive. So we also have that same issue with germination timing. As I'm growing a native plant, I sow the seeds and they germinate the next year, and I pot up all those, but there were seeds in the soil still that were going to germinate the following year and the year after that. A lot of species have what's called variable germination timing. So some of the seeds will germinate after 1 year, some will germinate after 2 years, and some will germinate after 3 years. And that's a hedge against bad conditions. If they all germinate at 1 year and then we have a drought, they're all wiped out. But if some of the seeds remain dormant and they don't germinate until the next year, then that population can continue to survive. But if I, as a grower, am continuing to select every year for the 1 year germinators, eventually we're going to lose all the genetics for that delayed germination piece. Things you don't think about. We also need to know how to handle rare and endangered and threatened species. So I'm not going to say too much about this, but does it make sense to collect from those populations if they're so rare and endangered? Maybe yes, because then you could produce more plants and put them back and help them along. But if you do collect, you might end up compromising that population. And then also, if you put new genetics into the population, it might help or it might hurt. And it's hard to predict. Here's another one for sustainability-minded folks. How do we be more sustainable with potting soils? Potting soils have peat in them. And if you think about where's peat come from? Well, they're digging up peat bogs in Canada and putting in the soil. We're a restoration organization. How can we, in good conscience, cause the destruction of one habitat in order to create another? So how can we be more sustainable? We're investigating different potting soils that don't use peat. So we'll let you know next year how it went. Okay, where do we work? So now I got everybody excited and your mind blown with all of these issues and thoughts. This is sort of the region that we work in, and it's a little bit closer up view of the ecoregions. So Westchester's 59. This is 58 that goes through Eastern Orange and Putnam and Eastern Dutchess, and 67 is Western Orange up through Ulster. So those plus 64, those 4 ecoregions are the ecoregions we're working in. We're not working in 62. We had to sort of put some limits in. There's the map again to show you how that all goes together. So we said we were working in 58, but 58, look, 58 goes all the way up here. Okay, but remember that hardiness zones. So we're keeping the seeds within the hardiness zone. So the hardiness zone works horizontally, and that hardiness zone is right around here. So we're not, for example, taking seeds from the Adirondack and bringing them down here, or vice versa. We're keeping them all within the Hudson Valley. All right, here's some of our projects. So I mentioned Black Rock Forest. We have a couple different restoration sites there. Granite Mountain is a Hudson Highlands Land Trust property in Putnam County. We're doing a couple restoration sites at that preserve. We're working with Pound Ridge Land Conservancy in Pound Ridge. They have a lot of small preserves, and we've done 2 restoration projects in 2 of their preserves, and we have another preserve we're looking at for next year. With the New York State Parks, we've done a really exciting project in Farnstock State Park where there's New England cottontails. New England cottontails are rabbits that are of special concern, and they have a restricted range. And right now they're living within an area that's dominated by Japanese barberry. And they end up getting very heavy tick loads from living in those barberry plants. The barberries provide cover for them from predators, but the park would like to get rid of the barberries and have a native habitat, but they can't do it wholesale because they don't want the New England cottontails to suffer. So we're part of an experiment where they've removed small patches of barberry, and they put up fencing around that area for us, and we did a native planting. We're going to establish a native habitat in that area. And once it's established, they're going to take the fencing off and allow the New England cottontail to use that area and study it. And if it all goes well, they're going to remove all that barberry and we do all the restoration. So everybody keep your fingers crossed on that one. We're also working on the Old Croton Aqueduct, which is a long linear park that goes from Westchester to Bronx. They're doing a lot. For 10 years, they've been doing invasive species removals. And so we're just helping with some restoration projects in various spots along there. Nancy Conger Westbrook Preserve is a new partner for this year. It's in West Milford. That might be closer to some of you guys that are in Warwick than a few of these other spots. We're going to be working with them for a restoration project for the first time this year. And then we're preparing for a project in Bergen County, New Jersey, which we'll be collecting seeds for in the fall. We have some new workshops that are happening. We're now doing a fern spore sowing workshop. We had one in February, March, and April. The April one is sold out. It's too late to sign up for that, but we will be doing more in the fall over the winter. So, okay. Upcoming volunteer dates. These aren't yet on our website, but they will be soon. So Black Rock Forest planting dates, these are the soonest ones, May 18th and the 21st. So write these down on your calendar if you'd like to be a part of it. And like I said, these will be showing up on our website very soon so that you can sign up. And those are our potting days. There will be more events as well. So you guys can help restore the forest. Everybody can help, everybody can participate. And I always use this, I love this quote. When someone says, somebody should do something about that, about the forest, right? And then you realize, hey, I am that somebody. I can be a part of it. I can do something. And really with the way we do things, anybody can participate. It's a very inclusive activity. You can grow plants, you can do planting, you can collect seeds, you can wash pots. So we wash our pots and reuse them. So there's a lot of different activities you can do. And I will end on this slide. You got the QR code if you would like to look at our newsletters and sign up for our newsletters. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out and tells you everything that's going on, and will notify you when our events are posted on the website. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can, if you're so moved, we are entirely volunteer, but we're also entirely supported by donations by private individuals. So if you could, spare a little bit for a donation, that would be wonderful. Bag of soil costs about $20, so even a little bit can help. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And you can share our information with other people. If you know somebody that's not here tonight that would love to do this, please tell them about it, share the recording of the presentation, have them sign up for the newsletter so that they can get involved. So thank you. And I will turn the floor back over to Michael.
Linda,
Yes.
first, a small thank you for your presentation tonight and a huge thank you for all the work you've done to learn these things and to do these projects. Really, thank you so much. This is really wonderful.
Thanks.
I guess we don't have so many people, so if people want to come off mute and ask questions, that's fine. Or if you prefer to type them in the chat, that's good too. I want to ask a first question. One of the projects that we're working on in Warwick, we call Transformation Trails. There's a huge 10-acre plot out by the old prison. It's surrounded by 12-foot fences. So basically, there are no deer come in there.
Right.
The problem with the site is it was allowed to go to weed for like 11 years or something. So they brushed hogged like certain sections, but it hasn't been completely cleared out yet. But there's like 10 acres in there, and over time, would that be a possible place for one of those founder plots?
It could be, yeah. If there's access to water, because you would want to be able to water if there were a drought that came. I mean, it's not entirely necessary, but one of the things about founder plots is you can care for them so you have a good chance of getting the seeds. And so ideally you want something where you can at least carry buckets or watering cans out there and water if necessary.
Very good. Very good. I have more questions. I can keep asking questions for a long time, but I want other people
Are
to
there
jump
any
in.
questions? Did I put any questions in the chat? I didn't see. No? Okay.
Marcy, go ahead.
When you were talking about, hi, Linda.
Hi.
Talking
A
about
long time.
the early, middle, and late germinators, or if seeds germinate and create plants, are the plants necessarily going to germinate at the same time as their parents?
Not necessarily. It could be impacted by the growing conditions, but they're more likely to have those genetics that would predispose them to germinate earlier.
Okay. And just one other question. Are all the places where you're working fenced? I mean, is that part of your
No. Some of our park partners, like Black Rock Forest and Granite Mountain, have hunting programs that are relatively effective. But most of the other ones are fenced. So for example, Pound Ridge, all of the restoration sites are fenced.
Great. Well, it's exciting. Thank
Yeah.
Linda, could you recommend some books? We have a book club that reads all sorts of things, and we have a native plants a committee. Do you have some books that you think of that you'd recommend?
Well, it's something I haven't thought through real carefully, but the book that set me on this journey of doing native plants and ecology was called Noah's Garden by Sarah Stein. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but I think it's very relevant to everybody. It's basically a homeowner's journey, and she and her husband moved to a property in Pound Ridge. She loved all the wildlife. She was starting to make notes about it and draw pictures of it. and they proceeded to develop the property, and she noticed that the wildlife disappeared. So she started educating herself about what she needed to do to bring it back. And it sort of said her journey of discovering why native plants were important and the native plant linkages with all of the wildlife and interconnections, and her experiences bringing back native plants and wildlife to her property.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Come on, somebody else has to have a good question here.
Sally.
Linda, I have a quick question.
Oh, and maybe
What-
Linda, maybe do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Well, I left it up so that people would have
Oh,
access, but
okay.
I think by now everyone has gotten the information, and you are going to be sending out a recording, right?
Yes.
All right. So Sally was going to ask a
Yeah.
question.
What would be like I'm a newbie to all of this. So what would be like 3 of your top native plant recommendations for somebody who wanted to, get started?
Well, again, that depends on your situation, whether you have sun or shade, whether it's dry or wet. Why don't I just stick with forest? Because that's relevant to wild woods. So what we start with for woods are like white wood aster, zigzag goldenrod, blue stem goldenrod, maybe some ferns, maybe some grasses, forest grasses or sedges. That gives you a good start. If you have a really difficult forest and maybe there's still some deer pressure that you're dealing with, white snake root is a fairly aggressive native that can go into situations like that and still survive. We gave some white snake root plants to the Westchester County Parks for a park that had been severely degraded by mountain bikers. They were doing some restoration. And I heard a report just last week that the plants are doing fine. So white snake root. I would not put that in your garden. Take over your garden. So
Okay. Great. It looks like the book is available on Amazon.
cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
Someone put in the chat, is it bad that I bought seeds from Prairie Moon?
No, it's just not as good as you could do. I always used to recommend Prairie Moon. I bought seeds from Prairie Moon before I was aware of the concept of ecotypes. So, now I'm aware, I'm like, okay, now I really want to preserve our local ecotypes and our local genetics. And so rather than purchasing from nurseries, I'm looking to preserve those genetics. But I have stuff in my yard that's from seed from Prairie Moon, I can't say no to it. It's native plants. A lot of native plants provide a lot of good benefits. But you think about everybody in the whole Eastern United States is buying their blue stem goldenrod from Prairie Moon, it's all going to be the same genetics. And we're going to homogenize the whole population. So it's better if you can get some local ecotypes.
Linda, are
Yeah.
there gaps in the native seeds stocks you've been able to accumulate that you're hoping is on your wish list,
Virtually all of them. Okay, so it's really bad, and there was a government funded study, the National Seed Strategy, that looked at what we needed to get to just to restore forests, the trees in forests, and they're saying there's not nearly enough seed. And there's a lot of organizations right now that are trying to get into starting to produce this seed. if you were to try to go find local ecotype seed for Warwick, so let's say ecoregion 67, for any number of plants, you would probably be able to only find it for a few. And there's only probably a couple nurseries that might be able to provide it. So it's Orion, it's virtually all of them. There are not enough seed and it's not enough availability.
The other question I have is, you were talking about restoring all levels of the
Mhm.
forest. Is what you try to do on every site, does that encompass missing animal species too, megafaunal impacts in forests?
Well, so we're just dealing with the plants, but we are looking at what uses the plants, and we're trying to get is the maximum amount of biodiversity in place. So not sure we can have too much effect on the megafauna, you know, other than maybe deer because we're fencing them out. But we're trying to look at the base level. You know, we're trying to look at the foundations because plants are the foundations of the food chain. So it's a little bit like, you know, you build it and they'll come. But it's also making sure that as we discover things like, hey, there are native bees that are entirely dependent on spring beauty, that we go out and we try to get some spring beauty and try to put that in our restorations where appropriate. Or, you know, wild geraniums, another one, native bees that's entirely dependent on wild geranium. So we're discovering these relationships, and we're not discovering it. People are discovering it, and we're learning about it. As we do that, we're trying to make sure that we cover those bases. We get those types of plants into the restoration.
Thank you.
Linda, I don't know if you're familiar with New York State's climate goals, but they're trying to get to a net zero by 2050. But that includes 15% of 1990 emissions can be absorbed by forests, and so
Right.
then they'll be allowed to put that out.
Right.
Like for the year 2050 or the year 2100, what do you think our risks are for the forest? Right? Will those sinks actually still be around, or what are the biggest risks that might remove those sinks from our?
Yeah, I wouldn't even look out that far. I mean, if you look at what's going on right now, forests are being cut down faster than they're being created. And
In New York?
yeah. Well, in Orange County even, yeah, you'll see this. And so the whole New York State goal of planting, I think it's, I don't know, 5 million trees. I can't remember the exact number. It's somewhere around there, by 2030, so that they can meet this climate goal. And like, but you're forgetting the forests that are being cut down at the same time. And if you're not planting faster than or preserving, then they're being cut down, you're actually going to be losing ground, you know.
And the
Yeah,
ones,
I think we have to have a lot more people doing a lot more restoration in order to have forests in 2100, because you need recovery, and that means you need young trees growing in the understory of your forests. Until we have that more broadly, we're in trouble. But you can help. You can plant some trees.
And that's thanks to the work that you're
Yeah.
doing and setting
Yeah.
this up so it makes it easy for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have some closing questions or comments they want to throw in?
I've got a question. I'm curious, Linda, on the places where you have planted and done some restoration work, how many of those have you fenced off from deer, or if any, or all, and in the areas, if you haven't fenced them off, have you had a chance to go back and to see how successful the plantings have been able to establish?
Right. I would say probably about 40% are fenced. That's off the top of my head, a quick finger count. But you know, we try to really be careful about what we put in the ones that are unfenced. And we did notice a little bit of browse over in Granite Mountain from the plants that we planted in 2022. So when we did our planting last year, we shifted a little bit more towards grasses and sedges and ferns. And we chose to remove a couple of species from the palette just until more vegetation gets going and those species can be added in amongst and maybe escape notice. But we have already been in discussions with the park manager of when we are ready to plant the shrubs, you're going to have a way to fence them off from deer so that they can get established.
I have a quick question. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Bethany. It's a spiritual retreat up here, and it's got a large piece of property, and they've asked us, our Climate Smart Committee, to assist in helping preserve this area, and they've got a lot of invasives. They're working on getting rid of some of their invasives. But do you have anybody that would come out and give them some advice on maybe what I know they will not, I don't think they have the ability to fence off the deer. It's you know, they've let it run wild. It's got a
And this is
Montessori school on it and stuff.
Yeah,
and
this
so
is a forested area or?
it's a little bit of both, but right now it's heavily forested. It goes right down to our Lake Cromwell, which is one of our water sources here in Woodbury. And so they are always asking me how to replace the invasives and you know, the area they're currently working in is heavily forested.
Okay.
So I was
Well,
just, do you have anybody that would come out
Cornell
and look?
Cooperative Extension has a Master Forest Owners program.
Okay.
And my husband and I are both Master Forest Owners, and we volunteer for that program. You can request a visit from a Master Forest Owner, and it's about like, you know, an hour or 2-hour visit
Okay.
where we share our knowledge and advice, and that, you know, that sort of gets them started on
Okay.
what they might be doing. So I would recommend that you reach out to the Cornell Cooperative Extension Office and ask for the link to request a Master Forest Owner visit and put that.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
Just a quick one. You mentioned about the spring beauties, and I just was thinking about, there's a lot of them in Tallman Park. I don't know if you're looking for them or you want people to.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I think we did a fern workshop at CCE Rockland, and one of the participants had mentioned that. And we do have the opportunity to collect seed from that population because we have obtained a permit from the state parks. So.
Very good. Well, again, Linda, thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation, and it's awesome work you're doing. We can only say thank you so much, and keep up the good work, and please keep in touch and let us know how you're doing.
Okay, great. Great. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.